Hello, welcome to another edition of Prove All Things. I want to thank everybody for joining us today, whether you're watching live on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, or on the CGI Digital Network app, whether that's on your phone, tablet, television, or perhaps you're watching on our website. We thank you for joining us live today. And for most everyone else who's watching recorded, we thank you for joining us as well. I'm joined with co-host Mike James. How you doing, Mike?
Finally got home last night. I had gone to Ohio to speak and also do some new Armor of God programs, some new YouTube videos. So I got that all done Sunday, and I was heading from Cleveland to Seattle. So I made it to Seattle on Sunday, and then Sunday night I was supposed to fly from Seattle back home to Ontario, California. So we get in a plane. We're flying for about an hour,
Mhm.
and the pilot all of a sudden says, I've got some. He started out like this: I've got some bad news for you. I was like,
You
and
you
then
want to
he,
hear
then
that
he,
from a pilot.
yeah, then he quickly said, but we're going to be okay. But we have to fly back to Seattle. And then he said the reason is our automatic what did he call it? The automatic landing system was
The
not
gear,
work.
landing gear.
Not the gear, but the what gets them through the clouds and away from mountains
Uh,
and things like that. That it wasn't working correctly, and there was bad
mm,
weather in Ontario. So he
yeah.
said, we're going to turn around for safety's sake because it says safety first. I was on Alaska Airlines. It says safety first on their packaging there on this in the seat. And he says we're going to turn around and we'll see what happens when we get back to Seattle. But
Mhm.
we flew back, and then you had to go get in a long line. They put you in a hotel, and they find a flight for you the next day. So I got out of there late afternoon yesterday, and got home to more rain here in California. So it was an interesting weekend.
Well, sounds like quite an adventure.
Yeah.
I was this past weekend was down in Florida with the kids, and we uh, we were at Legoland, which is definitely a fun place to take kids, and uh, that was an adventure in itself. So definitely good to see you again here on Prove All Things. We are actually going to bring in our guest, Bill Jacobs. How you doing, Bill?
Great. How are you guys?
Doing good.
Hey,
And
Bill.
remind everybody where you're from and some of your background.
Okay. Well, right now I live in Gardnerville, Nevada, which is
Mhm.
about an hour south of Reno and half an hour from Lake Tahoe. That's probably the most famous uh, place nearby us. Uh, I have been a minister since 1968 in the Churches of God, different groups, and also now independent. And 19 years ago, I got a counseling license. And so I've been in private practice ever since then. And we started a ministry called Life Resource Ministries. It's a Christian living, the part of the work that God does with us is sanctification. And it's about that. It's about
Mhm.
helping us be better Christians and more ready for his kingdom. And it's primarily, however, a youth advocacy ministry. We have a
Mhm.
soft spot in our heart for them. And we learned a long time ago that the best way to help the kids in the church is to help the adults because they make or break it for the kids. If your congregation isn't a safe, warm, friendly place, kids are going to leave when they get older. So,
And your website has a lot of really good information and presentations, and I guess like
yeah, like
classes and all types of stuff on here.
almost 300 different presentations on everything from basic Christian living and doctrinal stuff to mental health issues, how to deal with them, how to help people, how to help yourself. Although you're looking at the series page there, I do a lot of series so I can
Hmm.
go more into depth on topics.
Oh yeah, wow, wow. So yeah, quite a bit. Again, if this is what you're looking for, there's quite a bit of it on here of this definitely useful site features on here. Very, very, very nice. So glad to have you again with us today.
Really glad to be here with you. Always like to talk to you guys. You're a lot of fun.
Thanks, Bill.
So today's topic, I guess, is one probably I think I'm interested in, and I think maybe hopefully those in the maybe ministry and church to be interested in understanding this. But again, I think a lot of everyone else probably would like to know this. So could you just kind of tell us what we're going to discuss today?
Sure.
On today's program.
Mainly going to talk about how to know if you or someone else would need professional counseling. Like I was talking with you guys before, there's more and more anxiety and depression, and people are going more and more to medications because they're so worried about what's going on in the world. And it's like COVID was kind of a huge wake-up call to how things are working, and I see that a lot. So
yeah, I think what I understood is with COVID, didn't the prescriptions for antidepressants go up dramatically? I guess because of fear and worry, and I guess things associated with that. Isolation. Yeah.
Yeah, I read an article, a couple articles recently, Bill, about young people at that time during COVID. Depression, anxiety was really up with them. Did you notice any of that with your work?
A little bit. Yeah. I think most everybody I've worked with has mentioned that it's definitely changed their life. And some people are just more resilient, but other people are more isolated by it too. So
yeah, I guess like things like that, I guess we have potential bank failures. We've had bank failures. There's potential war with possibly Russia and China. There's all these things that people can read about in the news and can definitely cause anxiety out there, and for people to be worried, or for people to maybe believe that we're living in the time of the end.
Absolutely. So how would you know if somebody needed that kind of support?
Yeah, and you mentioned me before we started that you had I guess an example of the difference between, I guess, demon possession possibly and people who need counseling. Again, because I know as an elder, I don't think I've ever dealt with anybody who's been demon possessed that I know of specifically. But again, I would probably not the best trained to know the difference, since I've never encountered that.
Well, in the Bible and the Gospels, it seems like there's just a lot of demon activity there.
Yeah.
And I don't see that much of it, but I have encountered it. But what I think might have happened there is it's kind of like, bees to pollen. I think with the advent of Christ on the world scene, I think it drew a lot of the devil's attention and activity. I think that
interesting. That's I like that take on it. I haven't heard that before. With the sophistication of culture today, that maybe Satan has more manipulative techniques available to him to pull people away. For example, scientific reasoning and just the materialistic culture has led to a diminishment in the importance of religion. And if Satan thinks that you think he's not real, that works for him in some ways. But I think he's still out there. What do you think of that as another reason why there's a lessening maybe of Satan using that tactic of just the frontal approach in attacking people?
Well, I've heard it said that the devil's biggest success was convincing us that he didn't exist.
Yeah. Very
But
good. Very good.
and we're going to go through some of that
Yeah.
as we talk about all of
Mhm.
this.
Yeah, you know what? You mentioned something about like I guess bees and pollen, and maybe they're gathering where Christ was, and also I think about the population of the planet was a lot lower than it is now, and I'm not sure how I don't know how many demons there
Yeah.
are, but
That's
there's probably less demons to go around than there were back then,
No,
possibly, right? Yeah, yeah.
Jeff, that's another one I haven't heard, but it makes logical sense to me that you aren't hearing it as much because there's so many more people, and the Bible was written specifically about those types of things. You know, some of
I
it.
mean, there could have been like one demon per 30 people back then, but now it's one demon per 5,000 or whatever. Who knows? I don't. That's just just
The-
an idea.
I don't just think that that is something that happened back then.
Mhm.
I think that if a person focuses on that all the time, they're gonna draw attention.
Yeah, yeah, I
Or
agree.
it has a possibility. So I don't like to talk about it that much, but I do feel it's necessary to educate people in a logical and responsible way about it. But I don't sit around thinking about it all day.
Mhm.
Do you have any ideas how you distinguish between mental illness and possession, or someone's being messed with by spiritual forces?
Okay, well, I was going to save this for later, but I'll
Okay,
tell.
yeah, no, that's okay. Save it
Oh,
for later. Get into what you want to do right now. Yeah.
well, I think it might work to tell it right now because it'll kind
Okay.
of lead in.
Okay.
I had this 15-year-old client once, a girl, and to date, the most abused child I've ever worked with. And
Wow.
she was referred to me by a friend of mine who was a therapist. And she knew that she wasn't going to budge all that traumatic stuff, and that with EMDR, I mean, that's what that's for. So
EMDR meaning?
it's a trauma therapy.
Okay.
Stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing.
Okay.
Very effective.
You've said that before. Yeah. Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah. So this girl was referred by my friend, and because she knew she wasn't going to budge the trauma. So I started working with her and developed a pretty good therapeutic relationship with her. And she was really depressed and anxious when we started. And one day she came in and she said, "Well, my other therapist told me that I'm becoming schizophrenic." And I said, "Really? How did she determine that?" And she said, "Well, I told her about the thing in my closet." And I said, "Okay, what thing?" And she said, "Well, I hear noises in the closet all the time, and bumping and thumping, and sometimes in my room it gets cold at the top and works its way down." And I said, "Really?" She said, "Yeah, my other therapist said that I'm having hallucinations, so I should go to a psychiatrist to get medication." I said, "Tell me some more about that. What is that?" She said, "Well, the dog and the cat won't even come in the room when that's going on."
Interesting.
I said, "So does that mean they have schizophrenia too?"
Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard this about watching some of those shows on whatever channel it is that where they go into houses and things like that, where animals are affected, and that would be an interesting indicator to me that if something else is sensing something. And I've heard that animals can sense when an earthquake might be coming, or other things of that nature. That's very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So I said, "So what do you think that is?" And she said, "Well, my dad tells me it's probably a demon spirit." And I said, "Yeah, maybe the dogs and the cats can see something or hear something that we can't pick up on." I said, "I'm probably inclined to agree with your father because dogs and cats don't have schizophrenia. They don't have hallucinations that we know of. And so, and certainly, I mean, there is a thing called shared delusion or hallucinations in the DSM book, but it doesn't include dogs and cats. So she said, well, what do I do? She said, my dad told me about guys that tried to cast the demon out, and it chased them bleeding and naked down the street. She said, we wouldn't want that. I said, no, we sure wouldn't. So I said, okay, here's what you do. Those things, if that is what's troubling you, there isn't anything physical that you can do. You can't outsmart it. You can't chase it away. I don't personally believe in exorcism. I believe that only God can take care of that problem for us. So here's what you do. You don't sleep in that room for a while. Maybe is there a place you can sleep in other bedrooms? She said, sometimes I sleep on the couch. I said, well, whatever you can do. And every morning, you get down on your knees in front of your couch and you ask God to remove that thing from your house and from bothering you. And every night you do the same thing. And she came in the next week and she said, it only took 3 days.
Huh.
Wow.
Okay.
Interesting. I like your idea there.
Girl when she was 21, so that was 6 years later. Never a reoccurrence.
Wow. So she didn't have to take the medication or anything for schizophrenia, right?
Now, I had another case where this dad brought his daughter to me. I think she was 10. And he was kind of a man of few words. And he said, well, she has trouble sleeping at night. So I said, okay. So I started talking with her, really a sweethearted child. And I said, so what's going on? What are you thinking about? She said, well, there's voices I hear coming out from under my bed. And I said, what do they say? And she said, well, they tell me what a rotten kid I am over and over. It's like accusing me. And I said, anything else? And she said, yeah, there's a guy that's all black that looks in my window and raps on the glass at night sometimes. And I said, how long's that been going on? And she said, since my mom had her first episode, she would have convulsions. And I said, tell me about that. And she said, well, we were having a terrible argument, and I think I caused it. And I said, really? And so, long story short, I presumed that was a stress-induced hallucination. And I processed it with the EMDR. Took 2 sessions and that stopped happening. And again, I met her 5 years later. No, I'm sorry. She was probably 10. I met her when she was in college again in a restaurant by accident. And I just asked her about that. She said, no, that never happened anymore. She felt guilty. She felt like it was her fault. And there was a lot of other things going on in the family. There was a divorce and all of that. And so parents weren't responsible. They talked too much about their issues in front of their kids, and it's causing her a lot of anxiety. So, a delusion or a hallucination is where your brain isn't functioning properly. You're seeing things that aren't there, hearing things, and that can be caused by any kind of illness can actually bring it on, because if it stresses your brain, you're liable to have something like that occur. A lot of people see little dark spots around the edge of their vision, or, you know, when they get stressed. And it's sort of a mini hallucination.
I used to hallucinate when I was a child, when I would get fevers. I would run high fevers and have hallucinations.
Exactly. So that does not mean it's the devil.
No.
But when the dog and the cat, I mean, that
Right.
makes you suspect, and so you go looking there. But
So that's definitely interesting, and I guess there's really not much we can do to tell the difference. I guess other than just as far as you just treat him the same way you would just treat anybody.
well, I question people the same
Right.
way in an
Right.
unbiased way. I don't suggest, do you think it might be a demon?
Right.
I
What about
just leave it there and see where it goes with the questioning so that they have the freedom to talk about how they feel about what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
what about people who say that who come to you and say they are possessed? How would you handle those types of situations?
I have never had anybody come to me and say they were possessed. I've had people wonder if there weren't demons bothering them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I start asking questions about, well, what are your interests? And do you think about that a lot? And
Mm-hmm.
what makes you think it might be an evil spirit? And if I think it is, then I tell them to do what I told that little girl to do, and I pray with them. If they're Christian, and they want help with that, I pray
Yeah.
with them. I said,
I've
said to people, when you're praying in the morning about that, you can know that I will be too on your behalf.
Mm-hmm.
And in the evening, I'll say the same prayer for you again, and we can work together on it. But that is more of a pastoral, faith-based approach, and the diagnostic manual does not allow for anything like that. Although a lot of the symptoms are in the book, but they have a humanistic explanation. For
Yeah. Well, what about someone? I mean, I don't know if I've ever met anybody who said they were demon possessed, but I have met a couple who said they were Jesus. And there was a guy who had read a book that Vance Stinson had written, and when I was working at the office in Tyler, he drove from Atlanta, Georgia, all the way to our office so that he could speak to Vance Stinson, because Vance Stinson had figured something out in that book about this guy being Jesus. Which I don't think he did it. He did it, but that's what the guy interpreted or whatever.
What booklet was it? Do you remember?
I can't remember what it was, but I do remember that he really, really sincerely thought that he was Jesus, and he was like somehow here to give us a message and whatnot. Did you ever deal with anybody who has that kind of like belief, or is that just beyond?
Yeah, but only in our church, not in my practice.
Okay.
And
because I would say that's definitely either some kind of mental disorder or possibly demon vexation or something going on there. There's not right when you believe that you're Jesus. I think there's something going on there.
Well, I've listened to quite a few tapes when I was doing my master's degree, interviews with people that were schizophrenic. And they almost always have a God component in there, in that hallucination delusion that they're entrapped by. And they're either the devil's out to get them, or they and the devil are close buddies, And you can't talk. Well, the book says you can't talk people out of that.
Okay.
You can, like I've talked to this young woman once on the phone. That I met her out in California when I was pastoring in San Jose there, and she'd run away from home and was in Santa Cruz and got in with some bad influences. And after I moved away from there years later, maybe 10 years later, she called me up and told me that she thought that the church I was in was like one of the two witnesses to proclaim the return of Christ. And, she told me that she had gone to Mexico and she had a sore throat and she ate something and some worms got into her body and they were controlling her. And
that's interesting. That's interesting. You mentioned the worms, because I've dealt with someone who talked about worms, like he was trying to get rid of these worms in his body, and now that he was getting rid of them, he was getting better. But it was an ongoing thing. That's interesting.
Well, See, if I'd have told her to take ivermectin to kill the worm, she would have gone some way. But I didn't. I used another approach. I said, I
Mhm.
was watching Oprah the other day, and she was talking about these full body scans where you can find out everything wrong with you. And I said,
Mhm.
"What? Do you have Medicaid?" Or she said, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, why don't you go try to get one of those scans and let's find those worms?" So
Mhm.
she said, "Yeah, okay, good." So the next time I talked to her on the phone, she said, that's not going to work. She said the worms told me that when they scan my head, they're going to go down to my body, and when they scan my body, they're going to go up to my head.
That's some pretty smart worms there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 So
So yeah. So I guess like 'cause the guy who came to our office that has that that belief that he was Jesus. I was there with Vance and we were talking to him. And so then Vance had to go to an appointment all of a sudden. So I guess it was a real appointment. Ben's like, I got to go. And so I was there left talking to him. And I just basically told the guy that I don't believe you're Jesus. I don't know if it's the right thing to have done. I said, I don't believe that you're Jesus. So if you want to, send me to hell or do whatever you want to do, I don't know, but I really don't have time to talk to you about this because I just don't believe it. And so you're not gonna convince me of this. And nicely asked him to leave. That was the best I could come up with. I don't know if that's the best way to handle that or not, but that's all I could think of at the time. Because I was scared that he might do something violent because it seemed what is this guy gonna do?
yeah, so most people that have schizophrenia are not violent, but
Okay.
sometimes they can be. And I'm not saying he had that.
Mm-hmm.
Schizophrenia is believed to be a genetically caused major mental illness. That means that it's not caused by what's happened to you, but it's
Mm-hmm.
because your brain isn't working right, like
Yeah.
your liver isn't working right, or
Mm-hmm.
something like that. And um, if that's truly what it is, then the only thing they found that helps that at all is usually some kind of drug regimen.
Mm-hmm.
What about we've got a question here from Bill in Montana about drug and alcohol abuse in relation to being a gateway to demon involvement with you, because you're messing with that spiritual element, as many of us believe that could be a gateway because of what you're opening up there with your with the drugs and alcohol.
Anything's possible, but most people, if some spirit came into their mind and tried to take over, they would resist that with everything they had. And a lot of ministers believe that it's pretty hard to be demon possessed unless you have some sort of mental defectiveness or weakness.
Mm-hmm.
And most people, I mean, look out in the world. Here's all these people that don't even believe in the devil. Wouldn't they be sitting ducks?
Mm-hmm.
But there's no
Yeah,
involvement because most people just wouldn't put up with that in their mind. They wouldn't tolerate it. And the only people that couldn't resist it, this is the theory on it. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not saying I
Yeah.
prove any of that, but the theory is that it's mostly people who have some sort of weakness. Now, alcohol can do that over a long time.
Mm-hmm.
People don't like to understand this, but weed can do stuff like that to your brain too. I met a guy once who was shot in a by just a thug on the street in Albuquerque. Which
Mm-hmm.
happens a lot there, and he uh, he he had been hadn't done weed since he was a teenager, and he was in his mid-50s. But he thought maybe that would help him get over the anxiety he was having about having to go to court and face his attacker. And he smoked a joint, and he said, "I did that a month ago, and I still haven't come down from it. It's like I'm high all the time."
Mm-hmm.
wow.
Well,
So
here,
one
here's a,
guy,
here's a question. I guess it kind of relates to what we're talking about. Because I guess we're looking at the question today of how to tell if someone would benefit from professional counseling. So they're asking, what is the best way to approach someone close to you that appears to have issues with a demon. Uh, I mean, I don't, any advice or from a
I,
counselor's perspective?
Well,
I'd like to get some more information, but go ahead, Bill.
that's pretty much open-ended, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah,
I could be right or wrong and
yeah,
still say the same thing, So uh,
yeah.
what I'd rather do is just go on with what we were going to talk about, how to
Okay.
tell counseling.
Yeah,
Okay.
because we're not going to be able to tell each individual case about what's going on, but again, there's some general principles about to look for, I
Right.
guess.
So if you look at the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which is a book that has all the diagnoses that are used in mental health, there's another one called ICD too. I think they're on 10 or 11 now. And I think they're on maybe Diagnostic Manual might be number 6 by now. Started at 4. But
And those manuals, Bill, they're put together by psychiatrists. They come together and meet and decide, what
yeah,
this is and what. Okay.
there's a board. It's research-based stuff. The thing that's really disappointing is that changes according to politics
Mm-hmm.
and the cultural stuff.
Like,
So,
I guess like gender dysphoria.
absolutely,
That's changed a lot as far as
and
treatment for that.
homosexuality.
Yeah.
Um, so you have to be careful. But really, what I didn't understand about all that when I started getting my training is those books contain diagnoses, and they're each diagnosis is a list of symptoms that a person has to be considered to have that condition, that diagnosis. And so really what it is sort of a shorthand way for professionals to talk to each other about people in their practice or that they meet in the hospitals or wherever. When somebody has bipolar, then both those people talking about that know what that could involve. And it doesn't make any sense to try to diagnose people or label. Really what it becomes is a bunch of just labeling. So we don't want to label people. I was listening to a TV show where they were interviewing George Bush now that he's retired, and he's spending a lot of his time working with vets. And they said, do you see a lot of PTSD or made some comment like that, post-traumatic stress disorder? And he said, I work with a lot of people who have post-traumatic stress. And the difference is they're a human being and they're stressed because something has happened to them in the past and it keeps coming up in the present. But if you call it a disorder, that's almost like there's no way to ever get over that. And he was sensitive enough and smart enough, although he was made fun of in the media, because he was supposedly stupid. And yet he was probably a lot smarter than a lot of people that were criticizing him. And he understood that the way to help these people is to help them realize this is because of something that's happened to you. It's not because your brain doesn't work right. It isn't a life sentence. And if we can just figure this out, you can get over this. And that was his approach with those people. So we don't want to go around calling people psycho or bipolar or borderline or, all of that sort of thing when we don't even know what those things mean. And even if we do, it's counterproductive. What can we do to help that person?
Yeah, that's a great point, Bill.
Yeah.
And I'll let you talk in a second here, Jeff. But just in dealing with a number of people throughout my years in the ministry in the church who've suffered from mental issues. Again, when I think of dealing with them, I'm always hopeful. I'm always trying to be positive, and I want them to feel that positivity. And, there's a scripture in Philippians that we can do all things through Christ who strengthens us. Paul was in prison when he was writing that. And I think that is true, that some people do break through from these things, and it's possible to. I hear the old refrain that, you can't get rid of paranoid schizophrenia. But I've heard of people, recently in some readings I've done who've made some progress in that area. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that there are probably two causes for schizophrenia. One is the genetic component part, but let's say you've heard people talk about schizophrenia that just causes people to totally withdraw within themselves.
Yeah.
Well, that could be a defense mechanism. Life is just too much to handle. So, and I've seen films of people that were completely free of schizophrenia as a result of doing EMDR. But that was because the cause of the symptoms they had were not because of a brain malfunction, but because of serious abuse as a young child.
Yeah. I just wanted to add what you were saying about making diagnosis. I guess as an elder in the church, I don't have that skill or qualifications to make that about anybody. I mean, I don't really have that. That's something only a professional can do, I guess.
So, you talk to people and you wonder what's going on because things aren't working. So the thing that helped me to understand that even with the DSM, the criteria for treatment is this. Are the symptoms severe enough to impair functioning at work, at home, in the marriage, with children? If it's impairing functioning to a serious degree, then we all can recognize they need some kind of help. The next question is, can I provide the kind of help they need? And we were taught early on, and back in the late 60s and early 70s in our ministry, that, and this wasn't stated out loud, but the implicit message was, you're the minister, you're supposed to be able to fix everything. And I mean, it was a totally flawed perspective. And what I learned when I took my license, and I also worked while I was a minister with a therapist who helped me understand some of the principles. And what became apparent is some people can be helped, but they need so much help that a minister with all his duties wouldn't have time to meet with them, once a week for 6 months or something like that. And and I, in my own case, I knew entering that program that I didn't know what to do, even if I did have the time. And so I went to that program to try to learn what to do to help people more. And I did learn some things. One of the things I learned was I couldn't help everybody, even if I was a trained professional.
And any suggestions on getting someone to get professional help when you know that that's what they really need? Any ideas on that?
Well, again, there's so many different kinds of issues people have. If people are hallucinating right in front of you, that's going to take more than a church pastor can handle, education-wise and time-wise. So now I had a lady that came to me who was schizophrenic. She was in her early 50s, and when she was a sophomore in college, she had a full ride scholarship to Stanford to study drama. I mean, and she had a psychotic break when she was in her sophomore year and couldn't function anymore, so they sent her home, and I met her in her 50s. And she told me her history, and I said, well, I agree with you. You have all the symptoms of schizophrenia, so EMDR probably won't help you with that. I determined that it wasn't because of what was happening to her. She didn't suffer any abuse. So I said, so is there anything you think I can help you with? And she said, well, you can help me understand what's real and what isn't. Now you think about that. If you couldn't tell what was real and what wasn't, how much trouble that would cause you in trying to live a normal life, and how sad and frustrating and enraging sometimes that would be.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I provided supportive counseling for her. And anybody can do that if they know the basics of it. Not much advice and a lot of listening and empathy for the person.
Yeah,
So
on that point, Bill, I have dealt with someone who, after I knew them for a long period of time, I first listened to them. I knew something was up with them, but after listening for a very, very long period of time, I then felt like I could possibly offer advice that, hey, you need to go to this hospital and get checked in so they can see what's up. And this person actually took me up on it, but it wouldn't have happened if it was the first couple weeks when I met this person, even though I thought they did need that help then. After this period of time and building a relationship and building some trust, this person did listen to me and take me up on some of that advice.
do you know why that happened?
Because of the relationship, the trust that was built, or what do you think?
I think that when we listen to people, they learn that we care about them.
Mm-hmm.
And that puts us in a very small community in their world.
Yeah, that's right. When I think of this example, that clicks. Yeah.
And that causes them to want to know what we think about their situation.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Sometimes it can
you,
be that
so
simple.
when,
Yeah.
Well, when you do have advice, if it's asked for, there's a good chance they're going to at least listen to it.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if we just start bombing them with do this and do that, when we don't even really know the situation yet.
Mm-hmm.
But you earn the right to advise people by listening.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big one for everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, slow to speak, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We all want to try to help, and that motivates us to make mistakes. We think helping is advising people when actually that's the last step. The first step is to listen.
You hit on something there also, because when I had gathered a lot more information, I was able to point to specific incidents that I had now experienced with this person and say, wait a minute. I said, remember this and remember that. And and there were some things that were really out there that when I brought this to their attention, months later, they kind of stopped in their tracks for a moment, So yeah.
So there's one other thing I wanted to mention. I mean, if you suspect somebody has a demon because the dog and the cat or some other real obvious thing, is going on, and you don't see any anxiety there causing hallucinations or anything, or there's just something that seems weird, or they're hallucinating or whatever. But the other thing to look for that is easy to understand, I'm going to tell you a story about one of my clients that will help anybody know how the brain works better. This guy comes into my office. He's about 40, nice looking guy, very articulate. I find out he's a musician, so he's a very sensitive person. And he tells me that he owns this musical company, and he was kind of a franchise. He had his own building, his own publicist, his own equipment, his own trucks, all that stuff. And he said he would start having panic attacks when his employees would argue with each other. I said, not with you? And he said, no, with each other. And he said, when the voices start escalating, my heart rate starts going up and
Mm.
I start having a hard time breathing and I start sweating and I have to get out of there. And I said, okay, so how do you think about that? That's weird, isn't it? Well, I know that one of the things that we're always doing, all of us, while we're awake, and maybe sometimes even asleep, is we're trying to figure out what's going to happen next. And one of the
Mhm.
things that happens, they can see it in brain scanning. To do that, to find out what's going to happen next, is our brain starts to do a search of our memory banks to see if it can find anything similar to that. So we might get a heads up on what's going to happen next. And that search always starts with earliest memory first. So I thought that this guy, that the argument was a trigger to bring up a feeling from his past when he was earlier, and that when his brain would start doing the search, when he would hear them arguing, would go to something that had happened to him in his early life that was traumatic. So guess what I learned? When he was 5, his family was having breakfast at Christmas morning, and the whole family's there, and his 2 grandfathers got in a fist fight. He said, whoa, what was that like? And he says, blood on the carpet, cursing, swearing, punching.
Wow. Wow.
Kids screaming, Christmas tree got knocked over.
Ah.
Knocked on, drag out. He said, yeah.
That's one of his earliest memories. That's very interesting. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I've read some books about early childhood memories and how those things, when you look at them and investigate them and think about them, you can find things in your adult life that maybe you haven't worked out yet that can really help you.
Yeah, so that's a lot of what we're seeing when people are I don't know if you ever remember watching the Three Stooges. Anytime Mo would hear Niagara Falls, he'd go, Niagara Falls. Slowly I turned. Well, that's the truth.
They knew it back then.
Yeah.
So I went on with this guy and I said, now you know how I found it, right? I knew where to look in his childhood. And I said, so what's the worst part of that you can remember? And he said, the blood on the carpet. I mean, it's right there instantly. And I said,
wow.
what emotions are coming up for you now? And he said, anger and fear. So this happened 35 years earlier, and he's still afraid when he thinks about it. So that's a
Wow.
clue.
Wow.
Wow.
It has not been processed because it was stored improperly, because he was freaking out when it happened.
And don't we do that with some incidents, Bill, where we kind of shut down and the brain, the unconscious has that, but you don't have that in your conscious self as you're going through the day. You don't know why I may be feeling this or I may be feeling that.
Well, yeah, and that's because you were overwhelmed by what was going on at the time it was happening, and your brain, the psychobabble term is, it maladaptively encrypted that information and probably left it in your right side amygdala or near it. So that, and on your right side, there's no language, there's no logic, there's images and there's emotions and body sensations, but none of, you can't put a date on it. You can't think about it as an adult. Okay. So, so I said, and where do you feel it in your body? And he thumps his chest just like you do when you feel panic.
Oh, wow.
And I said, okay, here's what I want you to do. I want you to, I gave him 2 buzzers that would go buzz, buzz alternately. That's the EMI movement. So they're using his eyes or using his hands to get a bilateral stimulation of the hemispheres of his brain. We're trying to move it out of the right side over to the left, where he can think about it like an adult. Okay. So I said, I want you to think about 3 things: the blood on the carpet, the emotions you're getting right now when you think about it and where you feel it in your body, and just go with that. The buzzing is going to make something else come up. So I ran it for 30 seconds and shut it off and said, what did you get? And he said, they're mean. Ran it again and he said, it's not fair. Ran it again and he said, we just wanted to have a fun Christmas. He sounded like he was 5.
Mm-hmm.
So bringing up the raw stuff, right? So just a few minutes later, maybe 10 minutes later, I heard him say, well, those 2 old guys were so narcissistic, they probably had no clue how it affected us. Ran it again and he said, my parents picked up the Christmas tree and we just went on like nothing happened. Ran it again. He said, they were friends 2 years later. Ran it again. He said, turned out to be a pretty good Christmas after all.
Yeah.
But until that moment, he had never been able to think that way about that event.
Mm-hmm.
It was divorced from his logic. That's what PTSD is.
Mm-hmm.
Got it.
So, okay. So after that session, he never had another attack at work that I know of.
Okay.
I spent months helping him get other stuff cleared up that happened to him when he was younger.
Mm-hmm.
His wife also called me 2 weeks later after I'd released him and said, I don't know what you did to him, but can I come too?
Mm-hmm.
Hey, interesting story. That's very interesting.
But I'm not telling you that to try to do EMDR on a guy, because there's a lot to learning how to do that the right way. You can hurt people if you don't do it properly.
Mm-hmm.
Is there something on your website to read about the techniques involved with that, or what would you suggest?
There's a whole series on it. You go to that page that Mike just showed, and there's one on EMDR.
Okay.
So, but what is helpful for anybody out of that is to know when you're getting some kind of reaction that doesn't quite make sense.
Mm-hmm.
Something's going on there that you're not aware of, and neither are they.
So if we're talking with someone and they're having something that doesn't make quite sense, that's probably when they might need a therapist to kind of work through that. Is what you're saying? That's one of the situations.
Most of the time. Sometimes we can do it ourselves just by being willing to think about the unpleasant feelings and try to unpack it a bit, But just listening to people can sometimes help them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that wholeheartedly.
When you see somebody that's way angry compared to like it's out of range anger for what's going on, or they seem to be offended in one area, or don't see things straight in another, it's usually because there's something coming from the past that hasn't been resolved, and it's getting triggered by what's going on in the present. Sometimes people, they marry somebody just like their abusive parent, and then their mate triggers them all the time.
Yeah.
Hey, Bill, there's a question here about schizophrenia, about, God healing schizophrenia. And then it also asks, is anything too hard for God? Because as you said, for some, there is something wrong with the brain. And I would also, to say Christ can't do something, I agree he can, but he doesn't necessarily always do something for every blind person or every deaf person or every lame person. God is not healing all those people right now. That when you go through life, sometimes you will suffer some things. And, that's not to say Christ can't do something, but he's allowing the world to be as it is. So when we talk about that biological aspect to schizophrenia, how would you talk to someone who's asking a question like that?
Well, there's even an example or examples in the New Testament where he did do that. It says that where it talks about and heal people that are possessed by demons, and those who are, and it uses the King James term lunatic, and that comes from the moon. So that means people that are insane. people whose brain isn't working right.
Mm-hmm.
So he has healed people like that, and he can today if it's his will. And the difference between us and back then, like the leper that came to him and said, "I know you can heal me if you will," and he said, "I will." Well, we don't know that now in every case.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, gotcha.
Part of faith is understanding that and allowing us to having us desire to do God's will more than our own.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Good answer.
I mean, really. I mean, I think some of us have been so focused on the letter of the law rather than the spirit of it that we don't think about where we fit into God's New Testament structure
Mm-hmm.
of living within God's will. Jesus said the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Now, he knew he was coming back, way out in the future, but he said it was at hand right now. So there are promises that he made to people back then that are still good for today, and that would include healing.
Mm-hmm.
But we also know that sometimes it isn't his will to heal us because he has something else in store for us. It's going to be better for us.
Mm-hmm.
Than
Yeah.
or whatever.
And sometimes those things that we're going through not only make us better, but others who are witnessing what we're going through, they learn things from that too. So there's a lot of things in play here when we look at this.
God is very efficient in working with us. If you read the book of Jonah, Jonah had a bad attitude. The people in Nineveh had a bad attitude. And the sailors on the ship he was on had a bad attitude. And God fixed all three of those things in that just with one thing that he did.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody, it says the sailors wound up being converted and making offerings to God. And Jonah changed his attitude and the people in Nineveh repented. So it isn't when he's working with us, he's also using what he's doing with us in other ways. With other people, just like Mike said.
Okay.
So we're not as smart as he is.
Yeah.
We can't figure that out like he does.
Yeah.
But
we have.
I'm thinking of the story of Job. Job finally gets it. Like, wow, you are bigger than me. I'll let you handle it. You're in charge,
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're as Christians, we are supposed to overcome. And I guess we have physical things that we may have to deal with. That's part of the process of learning how to overcome and how to develop that character. I think also, I guess those mental issues sometimes we get presented with them and we have to figure out how to overcome them. When you're talking about the post traumatic stress or whatever, I remember someone it's been now maybe 12 years ago. Someone tried to run me off a road. They were behind me as I was driving on a dark road. I could see the lights, and I always remember these lights come up to me, and the car keep hitting the back of my car, and it kept trying to knock me off the road. And eventually I sped away, but he kept speeding after me, and he kept trying to run after me, trying to keep knocking me off the road. All right, so eventually I was able to find some police and get him, arrested and taken care of. But for me, for probably the next half a year to a year, anytime I would get out at night, I'd see headlights behind me. I was afraid they were going to run into me, even though I knew that was stupid. Not everybody wants to run into me. It was just that one guy. But for some reason, I just had to keep going out there until I was like, okay, I'm not going to get run into anymore.
And that's kind of a normal anxiety reaction. But if it was still happening 10 years later, then we would say that was probably post-traumatic stress that you were experiencing because it got stuck. Yeah.
So it was something I had to deal with as a Christian, and I just dealt with it. The best way the way I know to deal with stuff. If I'm afraid of heights, I go somewhere high. I try to. I've learned that you got to face your fears, and that's the best way to not have them. At least, most of the time. But I guess, but if I still felt that today, 10 years later, that's probably when I would need therapy. I would think. right? If there's no way on my own,
Yeah.
have trouble on my own trying to overcome that. I guess therapy would be the solution. Maybe talk to somebody about that, or go to a professional therapist. What
Yeah.
would be your advice on that?
We all get triggered by stuff, all of
Right.
us.
Right.
So anybody could probably stand a course of something like EMDR to deal with their stuff. And I'm dealing with a church member right now who he had just kind of normal life stuff happen to him.
Mm-hmm.
But he heard me talk about EMDR and he thought it might be helpful to him.
Mm-hmm.
But mostly we just talked about stuff and it helped him. We didn't have to do EMDR. But it was still helpful just because I knew to listen and to support and just kind of go with the flow of what he was saying. And sometimes he would ask me, what I would think about it. So I would, or I'd tell him stories about things that had happened to me or other people that I knew that he could connect to.
Yes.
Yeah. I took some courses where they talked about writing down what your earliest childhood memories are, because there's a reason you don't remember everything from your childhood. You remember certain things because there was emotion associated with them. So when you write down these different things, if you start to think of those things in relation to your life and what has happened in your life, what may be not working as well as you want it to work, you will find some things that will make you start to realize some things.
We all have that.
Yeah.
And,
you know what? There's something you talk about. I guess the counseling. You listen to people and people talk about their problems and stuff. And I think I found since I've been married for the past 3.5 years, and in most of my life I wasn't, that having a really good Christian wife that you can talk to things about. That we in marriage, if you can talk and have communications, those kind of things you can talk about in a family, and even with our kids and the foster children we have who are dealing with a lot of problems. We do take them to play therapy because they have to talk to the therapist things they won't talk to us about. But I guess that listening to them and letting them talk and letting them speak and working through things is definitely, it's probably also part of a good family as well, I think.
So some church folks have accused me of blaming parents for every problem.
Yeah.
That isn't how it works. There's never been a perfect parent.
Yeah.
Our parents weren't perfect, and neither were theirs. And so that goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden, what the devil did. Not that we were born in sin, but that we're all influenced by his rotten environment he's created for us. And once the damage is done, however, our parents can apologize till the cows came home, and it doesn't fix it. But we can. So it's not blaming the parents. It's just explaining how the problem got there. Most of it's unintentional, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we can fix it. There's nothing that has happened to a person that they can't overcome if they know what to do. They may need help from somebody else, but
okay. I have a question here, and I think you explained it last time you were on with us, or maybe the previous time to that. Why does EMDR work? What's the process? Why does that work? I guess people don't really.
And again, it doesn't work for everything, but when it works,
right,
Bill,
right.
why does that work? Is I guess the
Okay.
good answer question.
Well, we never understood that until we had brain scanning. But when people go into REM sleep and their eyes go back and forth under their closed lids, what they see happening in your brain while that's going on is stuff moving out of the midbrain on the right side, which is where your amygdala is, over to your left side cortex, where you think about stuff. Most brain scanners call that housekeeping for the brain, REM sleep. I won't say most, but
yeah.
Kind of helps clear up some of the wreckage from the day. But we found out in about the mid-'80s that when you do it with somebody while they're awake, focused on a specific issue, it becomes much more powerful. I also wanted to mention before we stop today that that person that asked the question about alcohol and how would you help somebody, if they want to call me up, I'd be happy to help them with if they want to get a little bit more specific with me. I'm not trying to blow anybody off here.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
I just want to make sure I give safe answers.
So is your information available on your website where they can contact you through your website?
Yeah. There's an About Us thing or.
Okay, so go ahead and they can go to your website and they can go to the About Us and find the way to contact you to talk to you about that specifically.
Or they can. They may be inclined to email me, but email isn't going to get it when it comes to, because there's just more stuff that I need to know than you're going to be able to put down. So.
Absolutely.
It works better to just talk about it. But it may take me a while to get back to your phone message, but I will talk to you about it.
Yeah. I do like this comment right here. It says, "In the multitude of counselors, there is safety." Definitely to the proverb, and I think there's definitely
that's
truth
another
to that.
thing that I try to do. People ask me to work with their kids, and the kid has a view of themselves and the parents have a view of their kid, and I get a view of both of them. And I try to get everybody involved as a team to help a child. And sometimes I'll hear from a child something that the parent's doing that's not helpful. Well, those parents don't know they're doing that. And when you tell them about it, they immediately want to change it because they love their children and they don't realize what they're doing. So,
Bill, real quick, could you give a couple examples of things parents sometimes do that, as a kid becomes a teenager, from a little kid, they're going to change. So what do parents sometimes do to teens that maybe isn't wise, that a lot of parents do just because they feel they're still 9 or 8 years old?
Don't listen.
Okay. Very good. Very good.
Usually because they're so involved with their own problems, they don't stop to think about how what they're doing is affecting their child.
Got it. No, that's a big one.
So again, you have a lot of people say their parents didn't listen to them is one of the biggest things you hear.
Yeah. And, what sometimes that causes us to do, if our parents don't listen to us, is it causes us not to listen to our kids.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's big, man.
It's not a genetic thing that is inherited, but it's a cultural.
Yeah. And one thing I remember you said before, also for us in church, is that we need to pay attention to the kids in church. It's very important not to like just like dismiss them or not think about them. That we actually need to listen to, the kids that are part of our church.
I've started adding a mini sermonette at the end of all of my presentations about why I gave what I just said. And that is because you're a part of a congregation in the Church of God. And Jesus says that you're responsible not to turn those people away, even the little ones. We need to treat them with the same respect we would give an adult our own age.
Yeah, I remember early in my years in CGI, we had a new family come in, and after services, I started talking to her teenage kids, this woman, and she was so amazed by that because, again, she had come from a worldwide background. And she said, "I'm so happy you're talking to my kids." And again, I hadn't grown up in Worldwide. And again, I'm not saying that was all of Worldwide, but she was so happy that I was talking to her kids and spending as much time with them as I did with her and her husband.
One of the greatest compliments I have ever received, and I cherish greatly, and I don't get too many, is that I was told by a new person at my church that I was accessible at every level.
Wow.
Very good.
And that's because I try to be.
Yeah. No, got you, man. It's hard, but that's what we're supposed to be doing.
Winston Churchill said that when he prepared his great speeches he gave, he was trying to speak to 5-year-olds. And he said if he did that, the adults would call it clarity.
Nice. I like that. I
All
like
right.
that.
All right. Well, I thank you again for joining us today.
Yeah, it
That's
helped me today too, Bill.
yeah,
Could I
that's,
just say one more thing? I know we're
yeah,
10
yeah,
over
yeah. I was
now.
gonna I was gonna let you give us a final
Somebody
word.
asked about alcohol and drugs.
Yes.
Alcohol and drugs increase triggering. So
Hmm.
that guy that was trying to run you off the road, maybe trying to
Yeah.
get even with his father, but if he's drunk, it's going
Yeah.
to make him respond in a way that's way over what he normally would.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, the guy who tried to run me off the road, he within a month or two committed suicide. Unfortunately.
Wow.
Yeah,
And
some
and again
serious
again,
problems.
and what's even weirder about it is, again, I didn't know who it was at the time because it was just some random person behind me on the road. But when I went to court, because I had to go to court because I was filing charges because I didn't want this guy doing it to other people. I went to court, and then all of a sudden, I knew the guy. I had worked with the guy, and I knew that he had some issues, so to speak. That he had some things that he was not, that he needed. He probably needed counseling and needed help with, and so I felt really bad. I felt like maybe if somehow I could have talked to him or something, we could have worked this out or whatever. But he was just it was. Just again, very, very, very strange thing that happened. But
Speaking of suicide,
yeah.
we didn't touch on that today, but anybody that works with other people should
Hmm.
go on the web and look up suicide protocols and
Hmm.
understand that can be a mild thing or it can be very life threatening. And so you need to know what you're looking at.
Yeah, I,
And
I guess we need to probably know, if somebody has those tendencies, to kind of get them quickly to some help they need to be able to stop that, because that's
And
don't
and
blow it off. Don't blow it
check
off.
yeah,
check on people. Check on people.
You
Ask
know,
them how
yeah.
you're doing. Give them a call.
any hospital emergency room
Hmm.
and most of the places where they quick medical care have people that have listened to suicidal people talk enough that they know what to look for. So there's really no excuse not for trying to get somebody some professional, somebody that talks to suicidal people all day long,
Hmm.
knows what to look for.
Right,
And
right.
there's so many people that are suicidal. There are a ton of people that talk to them all day long. So
Hmm.
it shouldn't be hard to find one.
Okay. All right. Anything else you want to leave us with before we conclude today's program?
Um, well, I just hope everybody will go to that website and be motivated to become a better Christian, to be a more godly person, and to live by the New Testament
Hmm.
laws of God rather than the letter.
All right. I do appreciate it. All right. Again, thank you for joining us. We appreciate everybody who was out there providing comments in our whether on YouTube, Facebook, or Twitter. And we thank everybody, and we will see everybody again in 1 week on Prove All Things. Thank you very much for joining us. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye bye.
Take care, all.